Please join me in giving Mark Savoy a warm Pachyderm Club welcome.
Thank you, John. And that concludes my presentation. He did so well, you know. It's interesting how much history is involved in land surveying. You know, from the origination of the original surveys. Surveying is steeped in history, and one of our creeds is to follow the footsteps of our predecessors, which we do on a daily basis, by the way. The surveyors of the 6 p.m. are a group of people from Kansas, Nebraska, a little bit of South Dakota, and a little bit of Wyoming, and we got together and raised money to establish a monument at the initial point of the 6th principal meridian, which is the baseline for both Nebraska and Kansas. It's located near the town of Mahaska. I'm sure you've all been through Mahaska. It's fairly close to a highway, but and it's of course on the north border of Kansas, south border of Nebraska. It's the 40th standard parallel, and it's about 108 miles west of the northeast corner of the state. And from there, it's a true meridian line that runs south across the state or north across Nebraska, and runs through Salina, Wichita, Valley Center, by the way, and all the way down. And it is a true meridian line, so Meridian Street is the, in theory at least, a true meridian on the true meridian line coming south from that 6th principal meridian. I guess I can look at what we got here. Oh, it's another story. This is what surveyors think of the monument up in Nebraska. It's 3 surveyors and some other guy. I don't know how many of you know the other guy is that wasn't a surveyor. A lot of people think he was a surveyor because of his background. And that would have been Teddy. Well, Theodore, I call him Teddy, you know him so well. But anyhow, so yeah, 3 surveyors and another guy is what we like to refer to that particular monument. The rectangular system that we use was created by one of those gentlemen. The rectangular survey system that we use in the Midwest is, and other places also, other than the original colonies, most particularly, but was Jefferson, and he's the one that designed that system. I think originally he was wanting every township to be 100 separate townships in square. I don't remember the footage that he was going to use on it. And then he took off for France to lollygag around, and a few of the guys changed that to feet and created 36 sections, all in the same size of 5,280 feet, 1 mile. And so that's what we're dealing with today. What I have shown up here on the screen now is a map of Kansas before it was divided up. Those are all various trails across the state that were used, some to get to hunting lands, some were the Santa Fe Trail, some were cattle trails that were coming up from the south eventually, bringing cattle up from Texas. Oops. Okay, this is a picture of that, the state and where the 6th principal meridian is. It's not very centered on the state, but it is the baseline through Nebraska and Kansas. And as you can see, the initial point is right on the 40th standard parallel. This is just some of the early equipment that was used in surveying. Compass, like that 40th standard parallel, they actually took solar readings, to be able to stay on that parallel line. The first surveyor that attempted to come over and set that 6 principal meridian apparently didn't learn his lessons on how to maintain that 40-degree line. And he was about 2 miles south of where he should have been when he got to the initial point of the 6 principal meridian. And shortly after that was discovered why that line was rerun and continued on in a pretty decent manner for what they had at the time to run those things. This is an 1800s surveyor's transit. I've got a couple, or one transit sitting over here. It may be a little bit newer than that, but it was that same style of transit. This is a 2-pole chain. Most of this state, well, probably all of this state was laid out with chains like that, 2-pole and 4-pole chains. They liked the 2-pole because if they were going up an incline, why they could kind of keep it level as they marched up the hill, So that'd be 33 feet long. A 4-pole would be 66 feet. And that's a lot of measuring to get 1 mile or half a mile. Those surveyors, when they started laying those out, they'd have a crew that would come in and just do townships, the borders of townships. And then they would later have a crew or hire crews, not one for the whole state, a number of them, setting the section corners. So they would follow around the outside where the original border of a township was, kind of verify it a little bit, and then they would come in and start setting all the quarter section corners and section corners within that 36-mile square. And I'll fall back on my first comment about having to follow the footsteps of the predecessors. Once they set those corners, that is the corner. If it's off 10 feet, if it's off 20 feet, that's where the corner belongs. We can't go in and correct it and make it right with our fancy equipment that we use today. So, and there's not too many that are very far off. A little bit. I mean, nothing's that perfect, especially when you're using a linked chain like that to do all your measurements. Every 30 miles as you come south, the meridian is a straight line coming all the way south. But when you go east and west, they have guide meridians, and those guide meridians is if you've driven through the county and you come up to a street like 77th Street and you have to hang a right for a few hundred feet and then turn left and continue north. That's where they've adjusted for the curvature of the earth as they come south. And that happens every 30 miles, starting at the north border and going south. The very south township in Kansas is not a full township. I think it is 34 south. That would be typically 34 times 12 miles or 6 miles. Anyway, they just ran out of room when they got down to the border, the south border of Kansas, so it got shortchanged. There are 36 sections in a township, and they do start in the upper right-hand corner of that township and go west 6 sections, go south to the next one, and go back east for 6 sections, and that creates the way we learn about sections. Whoops, wrong button. And of course, they start at the north. The township's 36 square miles. So if you're on the east side, up against the east side of the 6 principal meridian, the first one is Township 1 south, Range 1 east, and so forth. So you continue to go south 2, 3, 4, 5 down to 34. And as that continues east, it's 2 east, 3 east, 4 east, 5 east, as the townships go. To the west, they'd be 1 south, 1 west, 2 west, 3 west. Continues on. Each township has fractional lots, and those are the north side of sections 1 through 6, and the west side of 6, 7, 18, 19, 30, and 31. And so when they stake out these sections, they actually start in the southeast corner and advance to the north, come back down, go over the next tier section, advance to the north. And so when you get to the north end of the township, some of them are a little bit longer than they should be. Some are a little bit shorter than they should be. And conversely, when they get to the west line of the township, same thing. So that the last quarter section could be a little short or a little long. So they are what we call the fractional sections. This is just an example of really how they thought back in that day as far as breaking a section down, and they tended to do it by just splitting everything into equal parts. East half of a quarter section, or the northeast quarter of the northeast quarter of a section, so forth and so on. And of course today we kind of refer to that, but we don't use those methods anymore. It doesn't show on here. There's guide meridians. About every I think it's 5 townships is a guide meridian, which actually starts that jog every 30 miles, where it shows up. And once you get to that 30 miles and get jogged over, then you go straight for the next 30, and then it's got another jog for the correction. Of course, this shows all the counties in Kansas. It shows the blue line, of course, is the 6th principal meridian. And it does have all the 2-letter initials for all of the county names. So those are each counties that you're looking at there. This was an official map of Kansas quite some time ago. All the counties were established, all the surveys had been completed as far as the townships and sections were concerned. Still used a lot of the trails that we saw in that very first slide. And there's highways following a lot of those, once they got going, why they just kind of continued using those same routes. They were probably basically created because of the fact that they had decent terrain to travel, for your Conestoga wagons and so forth and so on. So quite a few trails. This is the city of Wichita. I think it was 1887. I can't read it on here right now, but so in 1887, Wichita, at least as far as having lots available to build on, was fairly large. I'm pretty sure a lot of those were vacant sites, but anyhow, it's kind of surprising. It was more than a row of saloons and a barber shop, we'll say, and a place to imbibe. So pretty large. This is a copy of one of the first maps, and I can't even read what it is, but you can see the river there. And Chicago Street was later called Douglas, by the way. Here's another map. They were usually 25-foot lots. You could buy 2 lots or 3 lots or 1.5 lots or whatever, but that gave the latitude of being able to develop things kind of in your own pleasure. Typically 2 lots, 2 25-foot lots. And that's the end of the slideshow. It's interesting. I've been to Mahaska, where that initial point of the sixth principal meridian is, and we've actually, with the equipment we have today, can tell real close to how accurate it is to being the actually on the 40th standard parallel. And it's not perfect, you know. But once again, from what they had in the 1880s or actually late 1860s probably, where they started doing the surveys. Pretty amazing that they could get it that accurate with what they had to work with. But I do have a couple of township maps here. Most of them are fairly dull to look at. They're just little squares. Has some information on it. I've brought copies of the ones that are in Wichita, Township 27 South, Range 1 East, so that we, from Meridian going east, shows the river. And along that river, you got those fractional lines or sections I was talking about across the north and west sides of a township. You hit a river, and you've got a bunch of government lots, what they call government lots, making up little pieces because of the fact that the river's in the way. And the Arkansas River, since it's navigable, there's no ownership to it. It's the government owns that, and so there's a lot of special things you have to do to be able to develop even along the banks of that river. Not a big deal, but it's just you have to deal with the Corps of Engineers on that to do any changes to it or anything. But anyhow, if you get a chance to look at those, I'm going to leave them here. I'm going to give them to John because he really is enthusiastic about original surveys and everything. But it's just interesting to see all those little government lots. I can't explain to you how they chose to break those pieces up, but apparently it makes sense. They'll try to use like a quarter section line if they can, then maybe a quarter line, breaking it down into a fourth of the section, and then maybe smaller chunks like that. And then of course it's odd shapes around the bank of the river. I also included one sheet that shows one island. There were a number of islands in Sedgwick County, but they actually surveyed those islands. They knew what size that island was, and shows it, and it's reflected on the map. I don't know that they had a separate ownership for the islands, but they did reflect where they were. And anyway, that's about all I can tell you about it, unless anybody has questions.
Yes, sir. I have a question. Did the Indians who control some of the land here in Kansas at one time, did they have any effect on how the land was surveyed?
Yes. Actually, there were reservations that were established before the initial survey was broken down, and they had survey lines. There's the north border of the Osage Indian area was about 45th Street North. Not quite 45th Street North. Some places 45th jogs over and gets on it, and sometimes it goes up to the section line. But so yeah, they did avoid it. We did a survey over in Crawford County where there were 3 different reservations through the area that we were surveying. So, and each one of those, when you get to that reservation, it's a world of its own. It doesn't continue the nice 36 section township. But they incorporated it into the townships. But you have to deal with these boundary lines even today, even though now they're not a reservation. There are quite a number of reservations. And I'm not sure in the 1860s and 70s that our Indian humans, I don't think were completely convinced that this was a good idea to come into their area and break it up into any kind of ownership or sections and townships and ranges. And there were problems occasionally. And if you were lucky in that time frame, you might be able to get a small support from the Army, you know, to follow you and camp with you and help protect you from somebody that didn't really think he deserved to be there. So that was kind of interesting. There's some pretty interesting stories on those things too, in those situations. But I'm not going to tell any of those stories. Kind of ghastly sometimes. Yes?
I have a question about how you use GIS now compared to the survey.
GIS is interesting because it's information. So when a lot of people open up the Sedgwick County GIS and they look and they see a property line running by their house or the neighbor's house is on their side of the line, when they listen, it's really not over the line. And occasionally somebody gets real upset about that, looking at that map. When you touch that lot, it'll tell you a lot of things about the lot, and that's really the key to the GIS map. But I use them all the time in all the different counties to do research. Somebody will tell me that they need a survey, and about all they know is the properties at the southwest corner of 2 street names, you know. And I can go to a GIS map anywhere in the state of Kansas and at least identify probably what the legal description is, and of course who owns it, and a little bit other tax information that I don't particularly care about, you know, how much the value is in that county of that, and so forth and so on. But as far as how it relates to surveying, there's nothing accurate on it about how to do a survey. It's not unusual that if we're doing an exhibit for some group, or like that we used to be at the state fair, and you get somebody from out in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, and they'd say, hey, how much would it cost to do a survey out here? And of course, the first thing I tell them is you need to find somebody local to your area and ask them that question. And they said, yeah, but it shouldn't be that bad because you got GPS and satellites and all that. And I said, you would think that would help. But if it's never been located, and if you don't have coordinates for that point, then you've got to go find it the hard way and then collect data on it. And then the second time, yeah, you could have a little better chance of finding it. And everybody doesn't necessarily, everybody being surveyors. And not all surveyors necessarily share those coordinate points with everybody else. We do have to file a section corner report, and we tell what we found, and then we do some local ties, you know, like maybe reference to the distance from a telephone pole or a fence corner or whatever, so that you can go out and you can see those animate objects and make measurements and then dig for the section corner. Our company, we collect state plane coordinates on them, and we report those coordinates on our section corner report. So somebody else gets that information, and that information is available to everybody for anywhere in Kansas, with the Secretary of State, by the way. But on ours, and we're not the only one, but not everybody reports those coordinates on that. And that makes it real handy because it helps you find the corner, that's for sure, rather than measuring off of a tree stump or whatever.
So Mark, thanks for being here. A couple of related questions. One is, who sets the original lines that you started with way back wherever? I mean, was that just the United States, or was there some kind of worldwide organization who did that? And how do you get training on how to do surveying?
Don't just get real lucky and start working for somebody when you're in high school. And no, there are several universities that have real good courses in the world of surveying, and they do a good job of teaching you. Normally the biggest thing I'm going to say 40 years ago, that was handy was knowing how to use trigonometry and geometry to solve problems. Now with computers, it's a little bit different because the computer will do a lot of work for you that you can kind of shut off a part of your brain a little bit, you know, let it do the work. But unfortunately, no matter how much technical training you get, you learn a lot by experience, by applying those things that you were taught. And everything is really solving a problem. You know, I mean, some things were done not very carefully originally. Some things weren't done very carefully even in modern times. You know, if you get somebody that doesn't really understand about sections and how they're created, then they're not very careful about, if they can't find a corner, about setting one to replace one that may actually still be there. They're just not quite looking in the right place, you know. So, but
Where do the original lines come from?
well, the center of the river at the northeast corner of the state, and then the 40th standard parallel.
Who set the parallels, is what I'm asking. Who set the parallels?
Well, those original surveyors, and they did it by taking sun shots, by taking North Star shots, and determining, you know, just like a ship trying to go across the ocean. I mean, even back in much earlier times, they were able to know where they were going by taking, you know, using the things that are not on this earth, I'll say.
What about the sixth French Meridian? Who said that?
Oh gosh, I can't remember his name, but it was a surveyor, of course. And back then, I don't know what it really. Back then, there was not a class to take to get. You worked with somebody that liked instruments. If you think about how technical those instruments were even back then, all the degrees to turn angles and all of that. It's probably a watchmaker or somebody like that that got interested in making those instruments, because it's somebody that could carefully design all of those little measurements around that ring.
What were the United States?
Also, we got a microphone, guys, so if you raise your hand, I'll come to you.
Yes, I just wanted to, I grew up in West Virginia, and there's not a level spot there anywhere. It's all mountains or hills. And when I was in college, I was volunteered to be part of a survey crew. And I have a great deal of appreciation of Kansas doing the surveying than I did in West Virginia at the time. That was a lot of work. But anyway, I worked for K.O. Taylor, who was a civil engineer here.
Yes.
And we did quite a bit of surveying in the city. He's passed since. But what I wanted to ask you was, what about using wagon wheels with a rope tied around them or a piece of leather, and a guy sitting on the back and counting the number of times that rope or leather hits the ground to measure off the distance of 60 acres or 80 acres or whatever.
It's my understanding that they probably did do a little bit of that, not to set corners by, but to throw off. They set a lot of stones for the section corners and quarter section corners. So you got a wagon full of these stones, and I think they did use those methods to toss off a stone at approximately where they were heading. They also, driving that wagon wasn't going to make them go quite the perfect direction either. Those chains, you saw the picture of the little short links in it. They measured all of these sections with those chains, and there's a record of them. I've got besides those maps, I've got a little pamphlet that is done on every township that describes what their measurements were there. They went 40 chains and set a quarter section corner, went another 40 chains, set a section corner. And when we measure them today, we were pretty sure it wasn't a wheel, that somebody didn't quite count all of the number of revolutions to it. There are a couple of places that could have happened because they're off that far. And I think I already mentioned that, once they set those stones, that's the corner, regardless of what the measurement is today, We can't use all of our good equipment we have today and correct that, by a foot or by 20 feet, either one, We use those points as we find them.
Okay. Yeah, I was over at Twin Lakes here several years back, and on the back side of Twin Lakes, it'd be like it's like a L-shaped building in the back. There's a little placard with Jesse Chisholm's original log cabin. Is that accurate? Are you aware of that, or do you have any information?
I don't personally know that for a fact, but yeah, there's a lot of and Jesse was one of the first inhabitant of this area with his trading posts and things like that, So I would guess that somebody long ago made that determination, and it's probably a true story, I would guess.
Kind of follow up on this gentleman's question about, we're talking about Virginia and the hills. I'm from Meade County. There's plenty of ravines and some things out there and some of the rough. I just have never been able to get a picture in my mind how to take those chains and lay out all the sections and corridors and stuff, even in Meade County.
Yeah.
We got a lot of flat part of Meade County. But then the other comment was, have you heard of the Lone Tree Massacre in Meade County? Is one of those stories about the Indians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The measurements, we measure horizontal distances. So if we can't measure 33 feet without it being a problem, then you hold that chain level. So one guy uses the plumb bob, the guy that's on the lower part of the hill, and the other one's measuring direct. And so all those measurements are, to the best of their ability, measured in a horizontal direction. So they're not laying that down and measuring up the hill, especially in those areas in Kansas that are quite hilly. And when I was in the service, I just hated somebody telling me how flat Kansas was. There is a good part of Kansas that is flat. I will agree to that. But Kansas is really has every terrain you can almost imagine, except maybe a mountain, one that anybody else would call a mountain.
Yeah, I had a title problem with a piece of property once, and they sent out surveyors to resolve the issue. And they actually found a corner marker in the ground that apparently was this cornerstone you're talking about. Do they have to do that with the modern developments, or?
Oh, yeah.
So is there a stone marker on those plotted maps? So that the property owner can come out and say, this is my corner?
We set iron pipes or rebar today for property corners. But more likely than not, the section corner or the quarter section corner still has a stone there. They may be 2 foot deep or 3 foot deep or whatever. And it may now have a more permanent, visible, and closer to the surface point set on the ground over that item.
My question was, how close are those corners considered? You mentioned stones. I thought they were iron stakes. How often do they set them out, or a quarter, or what? How close are they?
The original corners were set every half mile. So you had all 9 corners of that section. There could be situations where you have government lots like around a river that there could be more points than just those. Back then, we didn't have much in the way of metal. If you were in, maybe along one of the coasts, or say the Gulf of the Gulf, they might have had ballasts out of a ship, which could be something different than the sandstone or limestone that we used here primarily. But even here, they would run out of stones, and there wouldn't be any stones locally. And they would save some of the firewood out of their fire from the meal they had the night before, and break those up into lengths. and they were sort of petrified just because of the fact they'd been in that fire, and so they would set a charred stake for a corner, you know, when they didn't have a stone available. But they normally tried to carry something with them, but they didn't have rebars, they didn't have iron pipes. You know, you couldn't get your half-inch plumbing pipe and cut it up into sections like you can today. You know, but I think most people now use rebar. And the statute in Kansas is that it must be at least 2 feet long. You know, if you want to use 3 feet, you can, but that's a lot of pounding to get that in the ground. So, yeah, the original ones for most of Kansas were stones.
Can you give a little insight on George Washington? Did he lay out Washington D.C. as a surveyor? And the other question is, on the 4 on Mount Rushmore, who were the 3 surveyors?
Well, it's Lincoln, Jefferson, and Washington. Lincoln, Jefferson, Washington. Roosevelt was the only one that was not a surveyor. And a lot of people pick him as being a surveyor over any one of the other ones because, you know, he was, you know, a rough rider. He was, you know, had a lot to do with parks and things like that. So they just kind of figured he was a surveyor, you know. But anyhow. But,
Washington, D.C.?
You know, and I'd have to be prepared to answer that question. There was a gentleman who did all of the surveying. I think Washington had a lot to do with making it happen and the design of it, but he didn't actually do all of the surveying himself. He had the capability of doing it. I mean, he did do surveying at some point in his life.
Since surveying has taken a huge part of how long did it take to get Kansas surveyed? When did it start? When did it end? And a lot of the counties in Kansas, as a former county commissioner, I found it interesting talking to my colleagues who are from other counties, trying to ask them about their counties. Was there a connection between the surveying and the county boundaries? Because a lot of those probably occurred in a similar time frame between the, particularly right after the Civil War, especially in western parts of Kansas.
Yeah, and in Kansas, they actually started on the east and worked their way to that first guide meridian, which would be about the east line of Butler County, and then it advanced again in a couple of more stages. It was probably 20, 25 years before they made it all the way across. And I don't have an exact date on that. I could get it, but I just hadn't worried about that before. And you know, each of those counties did have, you know, their different oddities about them and the different difficulties they had with them. Just like we were talking about, the hilly country was more of a challenge than the flat areas like out west, you know, in the Dodge City area, Liberal area, because it's pretty flat. You were probably usually measuring pretty level. Oh.
I hadn't heard much about corruption in surveying. Were property rights and water rights and stuff like that taken because of lack of knowledge of some of the people that own land?
You know, and I don't know how much of that happened actually. I mean, when I'm reading these notes, you don't all of a sudden see somebody have a 2-mile section instead of a 1 mile. So nothing real blatant like that. If there was fraud, I think sometimes there were surveyors or individuals who were selected to do surveying who really didn't know how to survey and maybe shortcut things. I mean, the wagon wheel could be an example of that, or maybe they just stepped off how many steps they thought it would take to go like half a mile. I don't know, but you can go down into Sumner County and you find some pretty strange shapes to things and some kind of strange distances that don't really make much sense technically. And I don't know if that was somebody's incompetence or if maybe they were trying to stretch something out for their buddy, that's thinking about buying some ground there. But I don't think there was too much of that. I think most of the surveyors were pretty reputable. And I think that if errors happened, like I said, yeah, once you've made a mistake and you've gone too far, it's probably going to stay the way they said it, even though they just got off their direction a little bit. The guys that laid out the actual boundaries of the township, the 36 square miles, were a little higher caliber than some of the ones that then came in and set all the section corners in it. So once they had that township boundary, there was a little less chance of doing too much fraud or anything. I don't know about other places, like Oklahoma's laid out similar to us. They got two different baselines down there. They're not meridians. They don't call them meridians, but they do have two separate baselines down there to work off of. I haven't done very much down there, and I don't know if there's any confusion or between those two baselines or what happens as you go clear across the territory.
Aren't there some parts of the United States that are not laid out on a grid like we are?
Yes.
And it's a different system?
Yes, and you see that real easy in the colonial states. They were more likely to put up a rock fence, just a stack of rocks, and that became a property line. And until as time went on, they accepted those, and then eventually surveyors would locate those.
They eventually did survey that part of the country?
Oh, yeah.
When a person views an aeronautical chart of Kansas, the magnetic deviation line is as crooked as a dog's hind leg. Yet when I look at the state lines, they're nice and straight. How did they handle magnetic deviation back in history, and who knew? How did they establish those lines?
I think they, as much as anything, were unaware of what happens with magnetic north. But they did, once they got a line established, they would use that declination to advance down the line. If you get up into Michigan in that area, you can't use magnetic at all, because it's so bad. Here, it's not terrible, but it's not that accurate, because.
Did they use the stars, the sextant?
In Kansas, that's what they basically used to keep their alignment going. Just like establishing that 40th standard parallel. Although you will see magnetic declinations on stuff, but I don't know that they use the stars for every township. But for the most part, things are. We keep coordinates on. We got coordinates on almost every section in Sedgwick County and a lot of other places where we surveyed too. But we got a lot here, and so you can look at those, and you'll see some little deflection and bends. There's no perfect straight line going across the township between all of the sections, but it's really not too bad. But with what the equipment we use today, you can really see those little fobbles, and it's probably because it was hard to keep a good straight line going back then.
A lot of people, when they transfer the ownership of property, they don't want to do surveys. Can you share with us some problems that are caused by encroachments that are unknown and people don't do surveys, or maybe when they do?
Yeah, years ago, it was the title companies that really didn't care whether they had a boundary corner set, but they did want what they called a mortgage title inspection, and they didn't want to pay anything, and their clients didn't want to pay anything near what it would take to actually establish all of the corners of the lot, even though it may or may not have been that difficult. And you rarely today see anybody ask for a mortgage title inspection. So back in the day, it was more a matter of time. And even at that, we could do a fairly decent mortgage title inspection. I mean, all the subdivisions that have been done since the late 1800s or in that area or forward, they set control points. As time went on, he did something in 1890, why in 1936 you might have had trouble finding it. In 1945 you might have had trouble finding it, just because of the age of it and what happens with building streets and so forth and so on. But they could have been doing surveys. But like I say, it's a matter of time. How much time do you have to spend on it to do it? Because time does mean money, so, and even back, and this would have been in the 70s, they were doing a lot of those mortgage title inspections. And if somebody asks me, makes a question, or if I'm just handing out advice, I would definitely recommend you get a survey. If you're buying a piece of property, get a survey on it, get a certified survey. And the reason I say that, it's not because I'm a surveyor or not because I want to be the one that does the survey. You can pick somebody else. But I have seen drastic errors just because somebody maybe they bought I can think of one subdivision where they had nice sized lots, but they wanted to put bigger homes than what was originally planned, so they would buy a lot and a half, or the builder would use a lot and a half, and then the other half and a lot and a half, and he went around like that. And we were doing a mortgage title inspection, and one guy was only deeded one lot. He wasn't deeded the half, and the neighbor was deeded two lots, not the half and the lot. And unfortunately, that line went through the house. I mean, so, and your first thought is, oh my God, this is terrible. This is, oh, look what we found. Oh, this is terrible. It was one of the easiest solutions because, number one, they were neighbors who were kind to each other. But when presented with that, the neighbor who was going to lose a half, he said, well, where's the line at? They said, right here. Well, that's where we mow to. I mean, that's about right. So he said, it needs to be straightened out. That's fine. I just don't want to pay any money. I'm not going to charge anything. But whatever happens with my mortgage or to get a release and all that, I mean, that's up to somebody else to pay any cost for that, So it was an easy solution. It's just that it was really a drastic one. It wasn't a matter of a foot or 2 foot. I mean, it was the original lots were probably around 75 or 80 feet. So you had 40-foot error in that property line, enough to catch the house even. So anyway, but and that's probably an extreme one, but we see that kind of stuff all the time. Lately, we're seeing people do too nice of a fence. Like build a pillar for the corner of a fence, up by the front of the house, looks real nice. Then the neighbor's assuming that some of that's on his property. So all of a sudden we're out there doing surveys to see where this fence is. The fence itself will be pretty good, but this big 2-foot square pillar is over the line, And I'm not sure why. If it would have been me and the other guy built that nice pillar, I'd say, hey, thanks, that looks great. A lot of people don't look at it that way, They don't want. I don't want that on my property. That's going to cause me problems of some kind. And so there's some negotiations that go on there. And the simplest one I saw was the guy says, I'm calling them right now. They can come out here and tear that damn thing down and move it over. That'll solve the problem. I mean, you could also solve the problem with an easement granting that, until such time it's destroyed by natural causes and then it would need to be replaced in different, there's all kinds of ways of solving problems, but anyway.
My quick question is really almost along those lines, so it's great. Just a quick question. I have farmer relatives and stuff, and sometimes somebody starts to intentionally farm their land, and mine are very nice farmers, but they pointed out to me, here's what's going on here. So my question, because I'd heard that maybe there's a time frame. Oh, I farm your land for 5 years. I mow that section between us, and now it's mine, whether it was intentional or not. So that's
Right.
kind of my question. Is there accidental or intentional if someone proves I've been there for 5, 10 years? Is that legal?
First, it requires some honesty between both people. And the guy that wants to gain the property, the only way, if he talks to the neighbor, said, no, this is where the property line is. Well, then they get a survey and they either prove it, and then they may both decide, okay, it really wasn't over there. Or the guy says, no, I've been farming that 16 feet or whatever for 40 years. It's mine. For him to get it, he's going to have to sue for it through a court.
So it's not legally his just because he farmed
Not
it
just
or
because
mowed it or whatever?
Yeah. Now, when you're in that courtroom and the judge is asking questions, then the attorney's probably already guided him on the answers, but he's going to ask, well, where did you think the property line was? Well, I thought it was here, but now I know it's not because they surveyed it. No, so for how many years have you thought it was over there? Well, I've lived here 17 years, So for 17 years, you were happy with that line. I mean, just because you didn't know any different. Yeah. That's liable to be enough for the judge to say, well, that's now the line. But
I'll tell my relatives.
Yeah.
They're nice Mennonite people that aren't infringing. They've just told me they're watching move.
Yeah.
The line.
Well, and that happens, if it's just mowing. Over time, you may just keep moving, maybe the wrong direction. Maybe you're shortchanging yourself, but, the strangest one I saw was and this was years ago. It was a fence line that was winky wonky, it wasn't a nice straight fence, and there was an argument over where the property line was, and we did a survey, and that fence was basically on one particular side, but it was still just shifting back and forth. I mean, some places it might have been 2 foot over, some places almost back on line, then maybe 3 feet. I mean, it's just, just a terrible fencing job. And the judge awarded it. I mean, the fences had been like that for 40 years, and it was real hard to say after 40 years that, oh, hell no, I knew that fence was wrong for 40 years. Judge isn't going to go for that. And what this judge didn't do, he gave the property to he said the fence is now the property line. See you, folks. Okay. So where is the property line? What's your description? The fence? What he should have said was, have this surveyor prepare a description for the strip of land that you're gaining, and then I want you to file a deed, deeding that ground to your neighbor. He's the one that owns it. I mean, that should be the answer that a judge would give on that, instead of just saying, yep, the fence is the property line. Because you could get your John Deere tractor out there and all of a sudden no remnants, no post holes or anything left by the time you plowed down through there and ripped that fence out.
There's no fence on the line I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, and that could be unintentional creeping. I mean, that's the way I would look at it.
One last question.
Hey, Mark, so is there still a national land office, a federal land office, and if so, how does that relate to what you do?
Around here, normally that's going to be come to affect more where there's national forests up against private lands, and so there's other things that you have to deal with. Even if you have a competent surveyor that says, "Ooh, this has been wrong all this time," that's the government's going to win on that one. So.
Mr. Mark Savoy.